it is 12 p.m., right?
Well, 1 p.m. close.
1 p.m. Okay, well, okay. 1 p.m. That's correct. Okay. So welcome. Happy to have you with us, Bobbi. And Esra Göksel, Esra Göksel will be moderating this session. Esra is also an organizational behavior specialist. She is also from my field and my university, the same alumni. So welcome to both of you. Esra, I think you will introduce Bobbi. So I will leave it up to you to introduce her. And welcome again. Thank you for joining us. Happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this nice and sweet introduction for us. Hello, everyone. This is Esra. I'm a relatively new member of the Turkish Academy of Management. I'm really thrilled to join this big family so that we can have some esteemed scholars with us sometime, like Bobbi. I'm delighted to moderate today's session, and I would like to thank both Duysal Hoca and Dr. Bobbi to let this chance for me to present this marvelous speech. Today's session is on team cohesion. I'm sure that any of us will be having some points, some common points, some catching areas in our academic or professional lives. As a person with academic and professional background, I'm quite thrilled to listen what will be some key takeaways out of today's conversation. And Bobbi, you as a role model, I'm really thankful that you accepted our invitation today. As a brief introduction for Bobbi, she's a psychologist. She's also a lecturer at Harvard University. She's an author, she's a speaker, and she's founder of Groups, a company working on group cohesion and team building and bonding for dispersed teams and for international teams as well. So before we move on to our session, I would like to give you a brief introduction to today's flow. We will be having maybe 30-40 minutes session presentation from Bobbi, and we will be directing our questions maybe another 30 minutes. So it will take roughly 1.5 hours today. Of course, it depends on the interaction and the questions you have. Bobbi will be trying to hold this session interactive, so we can have our questions sometime with some interval. Of course, you can use chat so that we can draw your questions from there. And Bobbi, I'm very thrilled to listen your presentation today. Thank you again for joining us. So the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esra. Let me just send that off. Okay, great. I'm so happy to be here, and I just really am honored that you invited me, and I can't wait to meet your colleagues. My hope for today is really to just, I know many of you and all of you have lots of experience and are working in this area too. So I just look forward to having a conversation around what building strong teams looks like, what it looks like for you, what it looks like in Turkey, what it looks like, what we're seeing sort of on this side of the ocean, and just think together about how to get the best out of people and teams. So my hope is today will be interactive. I'll do some teaching and share what I know, but I look forward to hearing from you too. Let me click here so I can share this. Okay. So as Ezra mentioned, I'm a psychologist by training. So I'm actually a clinical psychologist. I spent the first part of my career really doing therapy with patients. I'm a health psychologist by training. So what that really means is that a lot of what I was doing was stress management and mindset and building strong relationships. And a lot of that work brought me into working with executives, right? Stress, burnout, that kind of work. And then from there, I started getting more and more involved with teams. And what I realized is that in psychology, we have these like distinct, kind of disciplines that we think we're so different than each other. But at the end of the day, it's really human behavior, right? Like what makes people tick, what do they need? And these needs sort of remain the same across spaces. And really, I'm curious about how do we help people feel and function their best in these different areas? And I really spend most of my time in organizations now. So people very much see me as an organizational psychologist. That's what I teach at Harvard. So I teach students who are primarily working full-time and then getting a master's in industrial organizational psychology. The actual classes I teach are motivation, what drives human behavior in the workplace. I teach groups and culture, which is really a teams class. How do we look through the lens of group psychology and group counseling and group coaching and take a lot of those skills to to bring teams together? And I teach applied coaching, which is how do we think like a therapist, think like a coach for leaders and managers to like ask great questions, to assess readiness for change, to have some of these basic coaching skills, even if you're never going to formally coach in your career, but they're just great skills for leaders and managers to have. I wrote a parenting book, more out of a passion project. So I have 3 kids, 16, 14, and 11-year-old. I do a lot of speaking, which I love doing, things like this. And then aside from teaching at Harvard, I spend most of my time, we built a company called Groups, really to target teams, pretty much global distributed virtual teams who are vulnerable to lack of cohesion or disconnection on teams. Right. So this really emerged kind of coming out of COVID when everybody was struggling with like, how do we keep people together? How do we keep people, kind of working? And how can we solve for this? And I'll talk more about that at the end. But effectively, what we ended up doing is building a platform that brings experts in psychology, people have masters and doctorates, to teams at scale, to teach core content in high cohesion teams, and then integrate the work over time. And then we do assessments, personality assessments, and team assessments. So that's kind of, I love the work. It brings me so much energy, and it's really fun to kind of be building in this space, just like you all, especially during this time. Organizational psychology as a field is really growing, is getting a lot more attention, and it's just a fun place to be. So everything I do is through this lens. We're social by nature and hardwired for connection, right? And we kind of forget that we show up at work and we have these clothes on. At the end of the day, we're really tribal, relational animals, and we're hardwired for connection. And the challenge we see is in the business of work, in this evolving landscape where we're working in different ways, we lose sight of team cohesion. And this is really a pressing issue for modern workplaces, right? Because we're hardwired for connection and we need each other just like we need, food and water, but companies haven't quite figured out how to keep people connected, although this is a fundamental need. So my hope today is learn why cohesion is really important, how to assess and prioritize it, knowing cohesion is correlated with performance, retention, profitability, all these business outcomes. But, in the United States, at least, we know about 8 in 10 people are feeling disconnected and isolated, right? That's a lot of people. We tend to be more of an individualistic culture than I think people in Turkey, where you do this better than us, I think. But for a lot of people, they're feeling really lonely, and we know social relationships mediate all outcomes. So we can look at business and look at things like profitability, engagement, retention, all of the business outcomes. But this is also tied to health outcomes. So when we talk about this in terms of groups and sort of selling into companies, quite honestly, I don't really complicate the story with talking about the impact on health because it just confuses leaders and companies. But at the end of the day, I'm a health psychologist, and I know when we can get really strong relationships and strong teams, we're impacting people's lives in a much bigger way. And that feels really, really good to me. We know highly connected people who have strong communities and strong relationships live longer and have better quality of life. So for us, working with groups, we're able to capture a much broader group of people than we would if we were just doing kind of standard, or just doing mental health therapy or something like that. So what we'll cover today is really the current landscape of work, why do we even do this? What is cohesion? How do we operationalize and define this? This word, I think we use, a fair amount, but how do we define it? What is a team? Why is this particularly important in the evolving landscape? What are key variables in cohesion? Why shared goals or mission really, really matters. I think a lot of companies, especially, at the front end will invest in building out their mission, vision, values, but oftentimes that becomes sort of not a living document. It just sort of dies, in a file cabinet, or it's just something that lives on the website. but this is actually really mission critical because it becomes the social operating agreement, right? It's kind of the social contract around like everything. What are group norms? What are the values? What are we trying to accomplish? We'll talk a bit about the role of the leader in this and cohesion, strategies that we recommend often to like companies, and then can I share a bit about just how we think about this and how we're trying to solve, and would love just to hear your thoughts, open to feedback, hear what you're doing to solve for this, and just think together around yeah, how to help people like feel and function their best at work. So we're in this time where as AI and younger generations transform the workplace, the need to build cohesion on teams is more vital than ever. So we talk a lot about AI and technology and all it can do for us, but it also can create more distance for us too, right? People can do more remote work. There's people are being replaced in different ways, and it's sort of like, what does this mean for us as human beings in terms of relationships? And I don't know about you all, but like one of the things we hear all the time in talking to leaders is like, frustrations with cross-generational dynamics at work, sort of misunderstandings. And, there's a younger generation coming up in the workplace that is kind of demanding and asking for a different way of work, which in many ways is great. It's allowing for new innovative thinking, and we're kind of pushing the bounds of how we've historically worked together. But it can create friction on teams, right? There can be a disconnect between how it's been done in the past and new ways of doing. And so we just want to be able to bring people together. And, especially with the cross-generational stuff, we know that, the values we have about work are really shaped by the time in which you enter the workforce. What's the broader landscape that's happening in society that really impacts like how we think about work, right? So it's not right or wrong. It's not like the younger people know more, the older people know more. We're just saying there's competing value sets within one group. So how do we get alignment, not about what best is in terms of some like right way, wrong way, but more how do we get on the same page to accomplish the shared goals that we all are here to do. So we're really focused on empowering teams to improve how they function and feel, knowing that this is top of mind for most organizations. Lack of cohesion, the US alone cost companies $450 to $550 billion a year, right? It's a big problem. It's an expensive problem. And what this looks like is turnover. Replacing disconnected employees can cost between 50 to 200% of annual salaries. Absenteeism, thinking about disengaged or disconnected employees are 37% more likely to call out. There's loss of productivity, lack of cohesion, can cost about, $3 million a year for mid-sized companies. I think making about like $100 million ARR. It's shows up in all the ways we're kind of discussing. And then we also know that younger generations, Gen Z and millennials, have said that they will leave jobs lacking that connection and cohesion and purpose. So they want a different relationship with the company. They want a different relationship with the team, and purpose is really important here, right? So people don't want to just show up, do the job, and go home. So how do we, navigate this? And this is all made worse for distributed teams and high growth companies. So what I really lack of cohesion or disconnection can be a problem pretty much across most companies. It can be thought of as a bit of a universal problem. But we know certain companies at certain stages are more vulnerable to low cohesion or lack of cohesion. So companies we work with think about like global distributed teams where there's cross-cultural dynamics, different time zones, misunderstandings, different ways that we think about work-life balance, things like that. And then also high growth companies. So we work a lot with companies who are just hiring and growing, and the culture is still evolving, and they're trying to figure out how to keep their people together as we're growing rapidly. So there's a few, or any company going through changes, transitions, M&A situations, anything that kind of can rupture the relationship are vulnerable to lack of cohesion or disconnection. So just as you're thinking, we don't, you can put it in the chat if you want, or you can just think for yourself. But what was a great group or great team you were a part of? if you can just, it could be a sports team, a soccer, team from a long time ago. It could be a team at work, but just like, what was a team that you were like, that was fantastic? And then think about what made it great. What were those key ingredients? Was it the leader? Was it, what you did together? Was it the support? Like, what were some of those key variables? Because sometimes we just feel like, oh, wow, that was a great experience, but we don't actually articulate like what those magic ingredients are. So let's define what cohesion is. Simply put, cohesion is like the social glue in the group. So I think of cohesion as connection over time. You might go to a party and you might meet someone and you might think, wow, I had a great conversation with this person. And there might be like a thread of connection. I like that guy, right? That kind of feeling. But that's very vulnerable to breakage, right? So if the person says something and you find out something about the person, then that connection thread will break. Cohesion is that connection over time. So it's like connection thread over connection thread over connection thread. And it almost becomes like a tether. Now you're linked to this person, you're bound to them in some way. And when you're connected in that way or cohesive, then it allows you to ride out the bumps that naturally come up in relationships. Because we're hardwired for connection, social by nature, all relationships and all humans have periods of closeness and they have periods of distance, right? We call it rupture and repair in sort of the clinical psych world, which is like, we can feel really close. We can feel like we're, really, in a strong relationship. And then there's a period of distance. And then that can be a rupture. The person can say something, they can disappoint you, they might let you down. But when you have high cohesion, it allows you to weather those rupture and repair moments like better. And this isn't just work. This is like, think about your marriages or your partnerships or your relationships with your kids. This happens. Periods of rupture, periods of repair, periods of closeness, periods of distance. So how do you front and load building this connection and cohesion to weather those times better? And a strong predictor of cohesiveness is really talking honestly and having a lot of transparency about like where we are, how does this feel, what do we want, and where do we want to go, and how do we get there? And so just like in leadership training and team building, there's like some best practices, like direct, honest, open communication, but each team's different. Each team's like a family. So you have to spend time really articulating like, what is our shared goal? What is our team mission? Not only our company mission, and then how do we want to get there? Right? What are these norms? We know high cohesive teams outperform. There's increased productivity by 20 to 25%. There's improved retention. Teams with strong cohesion reduce turnover by about 50 to 59%, actually. There's higher innovation. So highly cohesive teams are generally diverse. There's new ways of thinking. They push each other with high levels of trust. And they drive innovation and revenue. There's faster decision making because there's high levels of trust. You can put a idea out there and you can operate faster by about 30%. And there's greater profitability. Companies with highly engaged, cohesive teams report 21% higher profitability. So what is a team? I know you all know this. It's a group of people coming together to work to achieve a shared goal that's really characterized by mutual accountability and interdependence. So these are the factors that I think are, just interesting when you're like thinking, what are those magic factors that we were kind of thinking about a minute ago? So it's the connectedness. So I think about this, I like to cook a lot, right? And we know you can put some ingredients in a pan, you might throw some peppers in and some onions and some meat, but unless you turn on the heat and bring these ingredients together, they're just going to sit as separate entities in a cold pan and not create a meal. It's not going to be good, right? But if you can actually turn on the heat and figure out the way of like what each ingredient needs, they can kind of cook together and create a different entity. And that's really what a group or a team is. It's like distinct entities coming together to create something new. And that connectedness or the interconnectedness between the people is really what matters. So think about strong bonds and shared identity. What is that? Psychological safety. So the ability to speak up without fear of shame or judgment. This is particularly important. You know, I think sometimes, especially in the US, people hear this word and they think, oh gosh, like, you know, DEI, diversity, inclusion, belonging can sort of, people can think like, what is this? Or is it, you're going to tell me I'm doing something wrong? But what this really means is that when you have high levels of psychological safety and you're willing to take risk, you're actually willing to innovate and put big ideas on the table. So how do you create an environment where people are going to feel brave enough to put ideas out there and not be scared of being shamed or judged, right? Trust. So trust isn't just in the person, it's really confidence in the person's like reliability and intentions, that you're going to say what that you said you're going to do. If I say this, I'm going to get this back to you by tomorrow, I'm going to get it back to you by tomorrow, right? We all know that people whose like deadlines don't matter at all, but you have low confidence and low trust that they're going to actually, in them ultimately, that they're going to get the thing done. Shared goals really matters, clear, motivating objectives. Role clarity, so defined responsibility reduces ambiguity. And if we think about this in terms of like team development or group development, think about sort of that storming when you don't really have clear roles or people are still trying to figure it out. It can create a lot of frustration and friction. Role clarity and getting that down helps increase cohesion. Open communication, honest, respectful dialogue, conflict resolution. Conflict is a good sign in groups, right? That means people can bring ideas to each other, but it's really about how is everyone actually involved and can this be resolved in a healthy way? Diversity, so valuing perspectives and inclusive practices. Mutual accountability, shared ownership of outcomes. So when we go into teams right away, we're listening like the language teams are using. So are you using all I language or is it we language? If my colleague sort of misses something, do I take ownership of that too? Or am I blaming, like kind of scapegoating or putting it on the individual versus seeing as a collective failure, right? And you want it, there's like, and then how we're talking about this. Are we a we culture or are we an I culture? Adaptability, so flexibility to respond and change. Can you pivot? Can you move? Can you stay together even during these changes and transitions? Or does change feel like it throws off the whole team, right? Support, emotional and social backing for members. So we know that when people feel like they can bring more of their human parts of themselves to work, they feel more seen, they're more likely to connect. It's going to build cohesion on the team. This comes up in vulnerability. We know vulnerability is a key concept or a key variable in high cohesion, high performing teams. A lot of the teams we work with are like, wow, what does that mean? Do I have to come in and talk about all my problems, right? Or my marital problems or the problems with my children? And what does this look like in a professional environment? Professional vulnerability can look like just speaking honestly when you mess something up, you know, to share as a leader things that you're a little bit fearful of, but also what you're hopeful for. As an example, I'm working with a company now. They have groups, our company for their whole company. They're in an industry where they're building wind turbines, right? They're trying to change the industry and how energy is delivered. You know, with our current administration in the United States, there's this industry could effectively sort of be going away. And it's really disappointing for them. These are very purpose-driven people who were hoping to make a mark in the world. And now all of a sudden they feel like their whole company is, not only is their company and their job threatened, the whole industry is threatened, right? So we are working with the leaders, like, how much can you share about your own, how can you hold hope and reality at the same time? And how can you communicate this in an honest way? That's professional vulnerability, right? It doesn't mean crying at your desk and, you know, like talking about all your personal problems. Leadership, effective guidance that inspires and facilitates. In groups, you always want to be thinking about, you know, what's the balance between structure? So there's safety and clear expectations. And then also, where's their freedom to explore and to like go off and build your own thing? And so leaders have a really important role here in terms of creating the structure to create that safety and predictability. And then decision making, right? Thinking about fair, inclusive, goal aligned processes. This can also be, you know, depending on what culture you're coming from, depending on what system you're in. Some systems tend to be flatter, some systems tend to be more hierarchical, but really thinking about like, how can you hold the structure in which you're placed, whether it's cultural or, in a broader societal way or by organization, while also kind of allowing people to co-create when possible so they can buy in and feel committed to the mission. Because we know when people are personally committed, they're more likely to invest, they're going to build connection, cohesion, they're going to stay longer, they're going to work harder, right? If it's a complete command and control type environment, there's going to be less motivation, more disconnection from the purpose, but also how do you respect the hierarchy in which you're placed? And that's unique for cultures, that's unique for teams. So I'd be interested to hear what you see there. And also I'll pause it in a minute and take some questions or comments, but feel free to also use the chat if you have thoughts or questions. And I know Esra will watch the chat too, but feel free to put them there too. Okay, signs of low cohesion. Low cohesion, like when we go in and we sit with a team for the first time, and I imagine many of you have felt this, and you get in and nobody says anything, that's sort of a sign of low psychological safety. Like people just don't want to talk. It's not when people are really fighting, actually. It's when it's silent. No one wants to say anything. Nobody wants to take any risk. There's poor communication. If there is communication, it's limited or it's strained. There's frequent misunderstandings. There's avoidance of open discussion. It's that feeling of like, ugh, I don't want to have that conversation. And you always have that feeling, not just every once in a while. High conflict, frequent, it's not the conflict that's problematic. It's the unresolved part of it, right? Or it's like also, how are people feeling in the conflict? Do people feel like they're actually heard, or is it just kind of one person starting fights and creating friction, but no one else has the power to speak up, right? Low trust, hesitancy to rely on or share information. It feels very siloed. Disengagement looks like lack of participation, poor enthusiasm, low commitment to team goals. People feel like they're acting independently. Fragmentation. So thinking about cliques forming with little cross-team collaboration. This shows up as like you have a team meeting and it's kind of the meeting after the meeting. You have a meeting and instead of talking about the issue in the meeting, after the meeting, everyone calls their kind of friends from their team to kind of gossip or talk about whatever like didn't go well. But in terms of cohesion, that's taking like the energy away from the team and breaking it off like into other. So that's thought of as like not a healthy behavior. Missed goals, difficulty achieving objectives or poor coordination shows up in the missing deadlines. Ambiguity, unclear roles or responsibility, leading to frustration or duplication of efforts. Resistance to change, difficulty adapting, just a negative feeling atmosphere, the type of environment where you're like, I just don't want to be a part of that. You don't feel supported, you feel criticized, the morale is just low. And then this shows up as high turnover. People leave, right? So think about, in the US, so, we talked a lot about quiet quitting or the great resignation that sort of emerged during COVID. People just kind of like went away. And people assumed, I think, that it'd be better in another job. But what we realized was really this was a global problem that like companies hadn't yet figured out how to keep their people connected because we were sort of thrown into COVID. So just ask yourself as you're listening, from 0 to 10, if 10's really strong cohesion, direct communication with everyone, healthy conflict, clear roles, well-articulated shared goals. If we went around your team and I said, what's the mission of your team? Everybody would pretty much say the same thing. To 0, which would be poor communication, tension, unresolved issues, that conversation after the meeting type, environment. You don't have to say it out loud, but just think in your mind, like how cohesive is your team? And then what makes you give it that number? So you can just ask yourself. Okay. So how do you build cohesion? Cohesion is really built over time. Cohesion is a relational skill. Companies often try to solve for this by doing like a one-off workshop or maybe just working with the executives. But Building cohesion is building relationships at work. We all know you can't just go on one date with your partner and have this like really strong relationship. You need to kind of continuously build the relationship over time with ongoing cultivation and care. There's a few things you want to start to think about sort of immediately as you're thinking about building cohesion. You want to articulate that shared goal. So if we're sitting in a team, what is our shared goal? What is our team mission? Can we define the team's purpose and the objectives to understand that, make sure we're all working on the same page? Also, can we articulate the values of the team and set the norms? And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Can we talk about who's doing what, expectations and roles? Can we start to lay the groundwork for psychological safety? What needs to happen so people feel safe to share ideas, ask questions, make mistakes without fear of judgment? And with this as a leader, you really want to be thinking, like, what are you bringing to this, right? Like, think about parenting. If anyone has kids, we know how we were parented shapes how we parent our children. Leadership's not super different. How we lead is shaped by how we were led or early authority figures, right? So it's like you just want to be aware of what's your internal dialogue around how you lead people. Do you just tell them and you expect them to do it? Do you build a relationship? Do you look for feedback? But you just want to be thinking about your own narrative and how does your style bring you closer to building a cohesive team, or how does it get in the way? Especially in the virtual world, you want to structure time for connection building. And this is really why we built our company, because like, how often do you hop into a team meeting and somebody says, or like, this is a typical phrase you would hear in like an American company, which is like, okay, let's jump right on in, right? Which is like, let's just get down to business, without taking any time for the connection or the human part of the relationship. But when you don't do that, people don't feel connected. And this doesn't have to be a 30-minute therapy session with your team. It can be something as simple as take 10 seconds, everybody go around and share your like highlight or low light of the week. It can be professional, it can be personal. But that's really important for leaders because it's grounding, it's allowing people to share something that's not work. We know that's, important for building a high cohesion team. But also, as a leader and the rest of the team, you're hearing where people are in terms of like how they're showing up at work. Somebody's had an awful weekend because their kid was sick or they had something bad happen in their family. You want to know that because it gives you more insight into their behavior, right? And then it allows you to have more direct communication around like just what's going on in the team. So how do you do this? Like, what does this look like? Okay, if you want to articulate a shared goal or team mission, like hold a meeting, spend some time. We do this with companies a lot, but you can do this yourself on your own team. Set aside some time to craft a review of the mission statement of the team, not just the organization, the team. Each team within the organization is going to have a different mission, right? But you want to align that with, what is the mission statement? What is the mission of the organization? What's the mission of the team? How is the team going to support the mission of the organization? You want to articulate the values and set the team norms, facilitating a workshop to brainstorm and prioritize shared values and create a team charter. So what we end up doing, there's like quick tools you can get online that are free, where you can have each individual team member first articulate their own value set. What are their own top 3 to 5 values? Or then discuss like what's really important to you, because these values are sitting in your team, whether you're talking about them or not. Then talk about what do the values of the team really need to be? How do your personal values align with these team values, and how do they diverge, right? So say like one of my personal core values is like autonomy. I like to do things myself in a lot of different ways. I work in a highly collaborative team, right? So it's like, I just know that sometimes they'll be like, I'll feel personally, internally, a little bit of friction when somebody's, either giving me feedback in a way that feels hard or something. That's a rubbing of my values, not right or wrong. It's just a values thing, right? So I want to know what my values are. I want to know what the norms and the values of the team are, and just have an awareness that when this comes up, that's why. So you don't internalize it, you don't personalize it. It's just part of like team functioning. You want to clarify expectations and roles. You want to start to create, you can, by clarifying expectations and roles, this is just going back to the org chart, using one-on-one meetings and a responsibility matrix to define roles and responsibilities, take the implicit and make it explicit. You can create psychological safety by starting meetings with like icebreakers or lessons from mistakes or modeling vulnerability as a leader. As I just described, this idea of highlight, low light, we use it all the time. Our companies use it. It's like pretty easy. And then make sure you're building time for connection building. So schedule, just like you have to schedule date night, you've got to schedule connection building time with your team. Focused on just team building, not solving problems. Add team learning and growth to meeting agendas. Each month, spend time focusing on what's working, what's not working, and what do we want to try. So if you're in technology or you're in product, you're going to be familiar with the agile model, right? Where you're just doing projects quickly, you're rapidly iterating, and you're checking in like what worked, what didn't work, what do we want to try? But applying that model to culture and team building on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be long, but even at like once a month in your team meeting, what's working in terms of how we're working together, what's not working, what do we want to try? Any questions about this before I keep going? I
Maybe,
can't see the chat, Ezra, when I'm sharing. Oh,
yeah,
wait. Okay.
yeah, there's a question. Does
Okay,
a
great.
high level from Esra Göksel'in kapusuz. Maybe she would like to turn on her microphone, or I can just read it out.
Oh,
Ayşe
yeah.
hocam, Ayşe hocam, müsait misiniz? Ayşe hocam, duyamıyoruz sizi. İsterseniz okuyabilirim. Okay, I will directly read it through.
Okay.
The question is, does a high level of cohesion in a group or team always lead to positive outcomes, or can it have negative effects under certain conditions? Bobbi.
Yeah, great question. So I'll give an example. I would say high cohesion, the way we're defining it, it's correlated with high performance. So I would say in the context which we're describing, you're going to see positive outcomes. What we do see, though, at times, and it's like very rarely do I find myself saying this in companies. We're working with this one company, highly empathic, but it was like they were almost too empathic. I remember saying to them, like, are you all too empathic here? It's like it was holding them up in decision making because they were so caring and they were losing sight of like the business goals because they were overly focused on preserving relationships, right? And so in that case, that's not really cohesion. That's more like avoidance, and it's kind of like losing sight of like work is work. This isn't a personal relationship. Um, and so really toggling, like coming back to like, what is the goal? What is the mission of the company? What's the mission of the team? And then how can I hold both the respect and care for the human while also doing what we came to do, which is the work, right? So you're always holding those two things up. So hopefully that helped. I see one other question, and feel free to share.
Thank you for the
Yeah.
question and the answer. So Neslihan hocam.
Hi. Actually, I was waiting for the end of the presentation, but my question was kind of related to the question asked. So I thought maybe does cohesion in the long run can somehow create stress like related to pressure to conform to the group or to the team? Is it possible? And is it possible also that it can maybe jeopardize out-of-box thinking or create innovative behavior? So is it possible to see that?
Thank you. That's a great question. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding it, but it's the question is really like if you're too connected or too cohesive, are you effectively going to have like group think, right? Or not, and then people are all going to be thinking the same. So the thing is with so that would be a sign of actually having lower cohesion. It's like a sign of high cohesion is divergent thinking. So when everybody is in agreement, somebody's not saying something because the likelihood that everybody is thinking the same is pretty much zero. So like as a leader, if everybody's like, no, I agree, you're like, you just have to know in your mind that's probably not true, that there's either groupthink happening or low psychological safety. So then your job as a leader, like the way you can undo this a bit or practice, you can play sort of dissent by obligation. So you can say like, listen, everyone, we're going to argue the counterpoint, and all of us are going to argue the opposite of what we just agreed to. And it creates space for the person who might not feel safe enough to put a new idea on a table, but their whole community or whole team now is like arguing their point, and it can sort of shake up that group think a little bit. But I would say a high cohesion team, you're going to see less groupthink. What you'll see is what it feels like is lots of different ideas. People are brainstorming, they're working together, and then a decision needs to be made, a decision's made, and then everybody gets on board with the decision, even though they might not agree, but they've accepted that the team has come to this decision, and then you kind of move on. That would be a signal of like a high cohesion team. Right, thanks. Yeah, it can be kind of confusing, right? Like the difference between being really connected and losing sight of like yourself versus cohesion and really more of a group psych, org psych lens, which is signals of it are divergent thinking, innovation, new ideas, new ways of thinking. So that's inherently, people are bringing different, there's conflict, right? When there's no conflict, it's sort of a signal something's not right. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay, let's keep going, and I'll spin through these because I know we're coming. I always have too much content, always. But let's
Good for
okay.
us, I guess.
So why are shared goals are so important? We've talked a little bit about this, but it becomes a social contract. It's the mission of the team, and it's this unifying object, right? And so if it happens like almost all the time when I get in the team and say, what's the mission of the team? People will talk about, building, generating revenue. Someone else will talk about innovating, and they sound similar, but they're different. But it's important to have a one-liner because it shapes the group behaviors. We call them shared goals. Highly cohesive teams have structure and autonomy. You're always balancing that structure and the freedom. Structure provides safety and clarity. Autonomy provides freedom to grow, develop, and learn. We know as human beings, we have a need to like grow. We're purpose maximizers, learners, growers, and people need the opportunity to grow in their own ways. Structure is built through clear goals and roles, regular check-ins, reliable schedule, clear feedback. Autonomy, different ways you can give it is through time, team, or task. How are you spending your time at work? Giving some flexibility there, some flexibility of who you're working with, some flexibility around what you're working on. Shared goals create structure. Highly cohesive teams have both clear structure, opportunity for growth. Shared goals align efforts, boost motivation, improve collaboration, enhance decision-making, enhance accountability. So just think for yourself, what is the shared goal of your team? Like, do you think everyone on your team would say the same thing? Has this been co-created with your team? Or is this just sort of like your thought or the leader's thought? Or do you feel like you've actually kind of co-created this? And what would the people on your team say the shared goal is? These are just like checks you want to be doing. So one way to solve for some of this is to build a team charter. We do this with companies. You can do this for yourself. It's a half-day workshop. You co-create a team charter. You define the team's purpose goal. You articulate the values or the why. You set the norms, which is really the how. Like, how do we like to communicate? Are we a text group? Are we a pick up the phone and call group? Like, a lot of that shaped by generations, actually, and just preferences. You just want to get alignment around best is. How do we like to make decisions? When something goes wrong, like when we have a conflict, how do we like to resolve it? How do we signal to each other? Thinking ahead before it happens saves a lot of headaches in the future. You want to think about how do we like to hold meetings? How often do we want to hold? How, just kind of creating the norms, and then discuss how to keep each other accountable, and then set a review schedule. Let's check back in. How's this working for us, right? The difference between values and norms, because you might be wondering this in your mind, the values are like really the why, like what drives us, like who are we? What are the values of our team, just like the values of the company? And the group norms are the how, like what are we going to do to accomplish the mission? Like, how do we like to communicate? Who are you going to prioritize? Is it the customer? Is it the employee? Like this kind of thing. The leader has, an outweighted role in shaping this. Okay. Like the leader has more everybody to build cohesion. It's everyone's responsibility, but the leader kind of has to go first because nobody's going to really like go beyond the leader. So the leader has to sort of set the tone here. This is very much coming from clinical psych world, but like the way we train therapists and we train our leaders in this way too. And every relationship dynamic, there's the self, what am I bringing? There's the other, which is like, what are you bringing? And there's a space in between. So say there's a conflict, right? What am I bringing in terms of my own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? I'm just going to use Esra as an example because I see you and I know you, right? So I'm going to be thinking, what's Esra bringing in terms of her own thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and how are these things intersecting to create the thing that's happening in the room, right? And so you just always want to be thinking, understanding your own values, your own strengths, your needs, your biases, recognizing and aspire to understand the values, the strengths, the needs of the other person, and then the space in between, fostering trust, collaboration, and mutual growth, to really talking about the dynamics between you and the team member. You start to talk about the dynamics, like almost like you're making observation comments. I'm just noticing, Ezra, like it feels like we're not on the same page right now. Do you notice that too? And now you're talking about this dynamic that most people just don't talk about. And now you're getting curious, like, I'm not sure if it's me sort of reacting or Ezra, I'm not sure if you're having a reaction. Let's talk about it. And you talk about it almost like it's external. But it helps deepen cohesion through that exercise. You build trust. It signals to the team that you can talk about hard things, and connection and trust are built through that. Leaders impact cohesion. Every leader has a unique personality and leadership style. So you really want to understand yourself and how it impacts cohesion. You want to, build trust, facilitate communication, set clear goals, resolve conflicts, and promote inclusion. These are just sort of fundamentals that leaders need to think about when building cohesion. And I want to be thinking for yourself, what behaviors do I have that brings teams closer to cohesion? Like I am an empathic person, so I'm good at building relationships. But, I have a strong belief in respect. And when somebody feels disrespectful, I'm going to, not respond well. So you just want to know that about yourself. What behaviors do you do that push your team away from cohesion? What brings them closer? Strategies. This is pretty much the last, and then we'll open up for some conversation. So, understand that cohesion reflects strong working relationships. This is a relational paradigm. Just like all relationships, connection, cohesion takes time and attention. So you can try by doing a pulse check. Ask your team to rate the level of cohesion on your team. Even if they don't want to rate it out loud, just mentally sort of rate in your mind, then discuss, why did you pick that number in your mind? What would allow it to go one number higher? Focus on what needs to happen to even move a little bit. We're not aiming for perfection, we're aiming for growth. You want to co-create the goal or the mission of the team. Oftentimes teams are really good at setting business KPIs, right? Like the indicators of like positive outcome, but set some around like culture and like, what do we want from each other here? Discuss how you'll continue to build cohesion over time, how you'll keep each other accountable. And then maybe once a month, build time to reflect on like your cohesion score, what's working, what's not working, what do we want to try going forward? And reflection's a huge part of this. This is how we learn and grow. Ask yourself every day, what did I do to move the team towards cohesion? What did I do that moved us away? Have that type of conversation with the team. So in terms of scalable solutions, I'll just share a little bit about what we ended up building at groups, because so the thing is, in a lot of ways, our company, many ways, became a commercialization of the class I teach, right? I'm teaching people group psych, group counseling skills to bring to teams. So we just saw this need, that disconnection's like everywhere. And then we had this curiosity. Can clinicians, like therapists really, who are experts in relationships, help solve this problem? So we piloted, can we bring therapists effectively to teams to help teams work better together by teaching content in high cohesion, high performing teams? But the most value is helping people talk. We built a platform that connects like teams and leaders to psychologists. We assess individual and team personality, and then we coach the team and individual over the course of the year. The problem that we saw in a lot of this, or I would get hired often to like give talks, they were expensive, they were one-off, and they weren't integrated over time, and they weren't available across the organization, right? You're not investing in the people like lowest down in your organization, but culture and strong relationships, like everyone has to be involved. But what we ended up doing is saying, well, psychologists have these like gaps in their schedule that are untapped hours for them. So they're willing to basically take a hit on their rate and then sell low-cost subscriptions to companies, right? So, and then we provide these ongoing insights around like connectedness or cohesion with recommendations. And we see it working, right? Even after one series of groups, which is 6 groups, we see increases between 8 and 18% in terms of connection, belonging, retention. Now we're building out capability to tie to productivity and ROI. But all that's to say is like you just want to, there's a way to scale this that we haven't been doing as an as a society really. And you just want to be thinking, how can you serve people in your organization beyond the executives? And what are you actually solving for here? Are you teaching? Are you bringing together? Are you coaching? And then what are the skills that need to happen to like have those relationships be built? All in all, we're in an evolving environment. Cohesion is essential for high impact teams. And the way you maintain cohesion and grow cohesion is through continued reflection, awareness around really looking at yourself as a leader in a team, and then adapting to build stronger relationships. And that's it. That's, but I would love to hear what you think. Feel free to challenge, to, say this would never work, that like I've tried this, like I just would be super curious what you are seeing, and feel free to be honest. And, and however I can help, I'd love to help. And feel free to connect too by email or by LinkedIn.
So thank you, Bobbi. It was a very, very extensive topic and quite insightful indeed. We have a question, but before we move on to the questions, I would like to summarize what are my key takeaways. By the way, in the chat bot, we have Neslihan Hocam's comment when you asked about the ideal team or ideal group or great group that we were in. Neslihan